All right. I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. We might have a few late arrivals, but that's all right. So, hi, I'm Josh Simmons. I am a community organizer and web developer. I spent time in freelance, in agencies, running an agency, running a startup, now as an employee. I failed a lot along the way, like a lot, and more than you could even believe. So, my goal today is to talk to you about types of failure so that you can see them coming, try to avoid them. Also to talk about how to recover from failure, because failures, both big and small, are inevitable, and failure is hard. So let's see here. Okay, so just one note here. I have a habit of talking fast, so if I am speaking too fast, please just raise your hand. I'll slow down. I'm not going to take any questions because we don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm happy to talk in the hallway. So let's get started. This is one of my favorite quotations, and the idea is that we're all here, we're all in the open source community, we understand the value of sharing. Failure is a very hard thing to share, but it's an important thing to share, because if I fail and I tell you how I failed, you can try to avoid that failure. But failure is embarrassing. Failure can be shameful. Failure can make you worry about your reputation. So those are things I'm going to talk about so that you feel more comfortable talking about failure. So this is me, a total whitewater rafting noob, deciding to go over a class 4 rapid in an inflatable kayak. Bad idea. Don't do it. But I learned a lot. So in whitewater rafting, it's a dangerous thing, but there are things you can do to make sure that, well, you don't die. Much like gymnasts learn how to fall so that they don't injure themselves. So, just a few notes about this. When you flip over in a raft, you want to make sure to get away from the boat. You don't want to be trapped under it. You also want to get away from all of the other people who are in the raft, because if you get entangled or you smash into each other at high velocity, it's not safe for anybody. You also want to do some other things to avoid drowning. For instance, you want to look for strainers. If you see bushes or dead trees that are falling into the river, you want to avoid those things, because if you get trapped in those, that current's going to push you under. But if you hit a strainer, you can climb over it, so there's a way. You also want to spin yourself horizontally in the water rather than flipping vertically. Because if you flip vertically, your feet might get wedged in the rocks up in the riverbed, and you could get pulled under. And lastly, you want to make sure that you're looking for opportunities to breathe, because you don't know when you're going to have that opportunity. This is what's called a reversal. So I actually came around, and it pulled me. I did a 180, and got sucked into that. And you're there for what feels like a long time. And so you really need to take a deep breath whenever you can and predict opportunities to breathe. Lastly, you want to make sure that you're going feet first down the river so that your head's not taking impacts and your butt is taking the hits from the boulders rather than, say, your spine. So this is just a way to illustrate that failure can be really dangerous, but it doesn't kill us, not all the time. And there are things that we can do to improve our odds of success and recovery from failure. Now, the analogy doesn't stretch this far, but I also think that failure is something that we can come out of stronger. I'm a strong believer that failure is a better educator than, say, success. We could be successful for any number of reasons, but if we fail, we can usually backtrace it to a few different things. So, one last note before I really dive into the meat of the talk here. To be totally clear, this presentation is about failing well, something that I did not do. I failed really poorly. And so there are lessons that I've extracted from that to help other people, help you do better than I did. All right, so we're going to start this talk with a top 10 list of ways to fail, or things not to do. One way to think about this is these are going to be types of failure. I can't tell you what exact failures you're going to run into. It's different every time. And so instead, we're going to look at types of failure so that you can sort of project into the future, look at where you're at, and see if you're setting yourself up for failure. Or if you're in a post-mortem, you can see what kinds of failures happened to lead you to where you got. All right, let's dive in. Number 10, lose touch with people. This can mean a lot of things. You want to stay top of mind with your coworkers, with your former employers, with your clients. Whether you're a freelancer or an employee, you want to make sure that you preserve those relationships that you've built. Because the number one way to get work and to stay sharp is through your network. Now, you're already here as part of a community, so you're already staying in touch with people. So it's not just staying in touch with your coworkers, with your past clients, but also just with your community. So there are a few ways that you can stay in touch and stay top of mind with people. You can attend events that they're going to. You can send them relevant news. If you know that they're into a certain subject that's relevant to their work, and you read something that's interesting, share it with them. People appreciate that. If it's not creepy, you can send them cards. If it's their birthday or a holiday, that depends on the relationship. You got to feel that out. Depending on what you're doing, you can run a newsletter. That's usually more appropriate if you're a freelancer rather than working for another company. They're going to do the newsletter. You can blog. Blogging is a really, really great way to stay in touch with people. And the last thing here, this is specific to freelancing. The best way to get revenue as a freelancer is from the clients you already have. Because the cost of acquiring a new client is not trivial. It takes a lot of work, a lot of relationship building. Sometimes clients won't come to fruition for months or years. So staying in touch with people is a really critical way to, again, stay sharp and to get business, frankly, to get business and job opportunities. In my case, I was so aggressive with expanding my network that I wasn't able to maintain those relationships. So for all of the dozens or hundreds of people that I've worked with, only in the last few years have I been staying in touch with them. That's a whole lot of lost opportunity there. Number 9, do not put all your eggs in one basket. Again, this is an example of types of failure. This means a lot of things. This means don't use only one marketing channel. For instance, if you know anybody who runs a small business who really enjoyed the free marketing opportunities they had on Facebook, you've probably heard them complain about the declining reach of their Facebook page. A lot of people started building their Facebook page as like their instead of a website because it was cheap, easy, free, they could do it themselves. And so when suddenly that marketing channel was decreasing, their business, their opportunities went down. But it's not just about marketing channels, and that mostly applies to freelancers and people who run small businesses. It's also about your skill set. You want to diversify your skill set, right? You want to be a T-shaped person. You want to have some expertise, but you also want to have an idea of what's going on in the rest of your industry, what's adjacent to the work that you're doing. So this could mean, for me, this means that, okay, I'm a web developer. I spent 14 years in web development. I made the mistake of spending 7 of those years using Drupal and only Drupal. So at the end of 7 years, I realized, oh my God, I don't think I know how to program anymore. You know, these skills, you need to use them. And so make sure that you're not over-investing in a single tool or framework. That could be Django, that could be Python, that could be... Make sure that you're comfortable with multiple frameworks and that you understand why you're using the tools you use. Having a diverse skill set and being able to pitch yourself in multiple ways is a really great way to show your dynamism, and also when an opportunity comes up, you'll know how to pitch yourself. Anybody here who's applied for a job, which is probably all of us, it's common wisdom that you want to send a resume tailored to the job that you're applying for, right? So diversify your skills and know how to pitch yourself a few different ways. Another take on this, specifically for freelancers and small businesses, is you don't want to have one client giving you most of your revenue. So I had 2 clients in 2010 that were probably 80% of my company's revenue. My company, that was me and a few subcontractors, really. And so when one of our clients went belly up, which was 50% of our revenue, things hurt. And we desperately we scrapped and worked desperately to bring in new work. And because we were desperate, we weren't able to say no to the types of projects we should say no to. And so we started taking on work that made us miserable, that maybe wasn't really right up our alley, but we thought we could make it work. So make sure that if you're in a small business or you're freelancing, you're not over-reliant on a couple clients. You want to make sure that you could lose a couple clients and you're not going to fall into like a financial tailspin. One other take on don't put all your eggs in one basket is you want to have connections at multiple companies, right? In this industry in particular, people change jobs pretty often. I think the average in the Bay Area where I'm from is like 1 job every 2 years. So a great way to make sure that you're able to make those jumps, you're able to move up in your career, is to come to events like this and network with people who are at other companies that you think you might be interested in working for in the future. All right. Number 8, do not work yourself out of a job. This is an easy thing to do as a freelancer. We are generally craftspeople, right? We enjoy building things. We don't necessarily enjoy sales or marketing. We probably don't enjoy finance. But the reality is, if you have a project and you're heads down on that project for weeks, months, whatever, and you haven't been doing sales and marketing, then what you're going to find is you've completed this project, you're thrilled about it, you're excited about it, you get paid, hopefully, and then where's that next check coming from? Where's that next project? So if you're in the business, if you're working for yourself, or you ever plan to, make sure that you're familiar with the idea of a sales funnel and sales cycles. You know, we don't get into this because we love sales, I don't think, but we should probably study a little about it because it will make our lives a lot easier. So that's for freelancers and small businesses. There's a different take on this for people who are employees in companies. I think there's a desire to make ourselves indispensable, right? We want to give ourselves job security. We want to make sure that we're needed. And that's a way that we keep our job. But I just want to caution against that, because if we are indispensable, we are also unpromotable, right? If you want your job, that same job for the rest of your life, fine, be indispensable. But you probably don't. You probably want to move on. You want to be able to work on different things at different companies and do more. So really, for employees, working yourself out of a job, it mostly means just staying sharp, right? So the example from before where I spent way too long using Drupal, I ended up having less opportunities later because that was really all I did. Number 7 is one that I think you're all like doing pretty well here. Don't be an island. And what I mean by that is join the community. Join communities online and off. Come to events like this. Come to meetups. Help run them even. And this, again, back to earlier, this is the best way to stay sharp and the best way to find job opportunities. So this doesn't mean you have to be going to events weekly, but maybe you should monthly. Just make it a regular thing so that people are aware of you and they know what you're good at. And so when they hear an opportunity that's relevant to you, they say, oh, hey, I know a person who does that. And they'll send that your way. This also, a lot of these are interrelated. This also harks back to don't put all your eggs in one basket. I think it's important to not limit yourself to just one type of community. right? So we're here at a Python conference. That's excellent. But there's a general software engineering community. There's a web development community that's over here that only has so much overlap with software engineering. And so there are a lot of different types of communities that you can participate in. And I encourage people to do that because you're going to learn different things from those different communities. You're going to find different opportunities from those different communities. One thing that's interesting here that I want to highlight is most job opportunities come from your weak connections, people that you don't know all that well. Maybe you've seen each other at a few events, but the job opportunities usually come from people who aren't exactly like you, right? So, for example, I was a web developer, am a web developer, and I got a lot of my work through designers and marketers because they would sell something and the company would need someone to build out what they had sold. I never got work from other web developers, except maybe once, because they're in the same business. Now, it's not that we were competing and we didn't want to share with each other, but we only relied on each other when we had projects that were big enough. So the reason I'm saying this is that coming to a Python conference is really great. You're being a part of the community, you're staying sharp, you're networking. But if you join the general software engineering community, or say you're working with Django or some other web frameworks in Python, well, join the general web development community. Hell, talk to some web designers because they're going to need your skills eventually. Number 6, do not do everything. It's really tempting to, especially when you're working for yourself. The last thing you want to do is fork out like several $100s an hour to pay an attorney, or several $100 period to pay an accountant. But just because you can do your own taxes or you can do your own admin work doesn't mean you should. It's not just that, though. This also means you want to specialize a little bit, right? If you're a web developer, do web development. What I did for a while is I billed myself as a web consultant. And so I'd consult with people, and then I'd build them a website, and I would do design and marketing and development. Bad news, right? Like, you can do that in a context of a very small business, but the reality is you're probably not going to produce the quality that they need or that you could be proud of. And frankly, hiring somebody else who can do something better than you is often more cost-effective than doing it yourself. Not just more cost-effective, but it'll make you happier, right? I like code. I don't like design. I don't enjoy marketing. And so when I did all of those things together, projects made me miserable. This means, you want to find a niche and you want to own that niche. Again, being a T-shaped person, it's good to know design, marketing, and the other things that are adjacent to your work, but you want to have some specialty. Yeah. The best way, again, these are all interrelated, the best way to not do everything, join your community and find the people that you can share the work with. Number 5, do not surprise people. And I'm not talking about like, hey, here's a bottle of wine for Christmas or your birthday. I'm talking about expectations, right? So, for instance, I am a perfectionist, and it's a horrible thing. Because what I will do is I will be working on a project, and say deadlines start slipping. My first impulse is to not say anything about it. My first impulse is to go heads down and say, you know what, I'm going to work this weekend, I'm going to get back to them Monday, it's going to be perfect, it's going to be done, and everybody's going to be happy. Bullshit. It's not true. It's not true. The worst thing is going silent on somebody. People are really reasonable. Like, more often than not, when I told a client that I was going to be late on something, they would work with me on it. And then they wouldn't be upset. So don't surprise people, whether that's with slipping deadlines or scope creep or the increase in cost or cost overruns. Make sure that you're setting expectations, you're not going silent on people. Surprises generally are not good in business. Let's avoid them. Number 4, give it away for free. Don't do it. Now this is an interesting thing to say in context of open source, right? We are a community, we're all contributors, we're all trying to build something for the commons. I'm not talking about that. That's excellent work and we need to continue doing that. What I'm talking about here is when your aunt or your best friend or your little brother says, hey, you can do programming, right? You can build websites. You know, I've got a new band, would you build us a website? And if you're early in your career, it's tempting to say yes. It's tempting to say, yeah, I need work in my portfolio, I need practice. And so you'll say, sure, I'll do it gratis. And I'm not saying that you can't do things gratis. It's great to do favors for each other, right? I mean, if you have a doctor or a lawyer in the family, you want to be able to lean on each other. What I mean here is make sure people understand the value of what you're giving them, right? So if you do work for a nonprofit, do pro bono work, or if you do work for a friend for free, still give them an invoice. Show them the value of your time, because our time is valuable, and they need to know that, and they didn't know what they got from you. Ask for recommendations. Get something in return. It doesn't have to be monetary, but don't give it away for free. That is a really easy way to burn yourself out. So I'm running short on time here, so I'm going to try to pick up the pace a bit. Number 3, do not overcommit. Saying no is really hard, but it's probably one of the best skills, like one of the skills that will serve us best in our life. For me, for instance, when 2 clients went belly up and my company lost 80% of our revenue, we were scrapping to bring in work, and I brought in a lot of work. I'm good at that. And what ended up happening was I brought in extra work. I showed it to the devs on my team, because at this point I was doing mostly sales and marketing and admin stuff. And they said, what the hell, Josh? We don't have time to do this. We're like heads down on these projects. We can't do it. And I thought, okay, well, I'm a web developer, and these are just basic Drupal websites. Sure, I can do it. Again, bullshit. Like, don't do it. Learn to say no. It will serve you really, really well. Make sure you understand your priorities and learn how to delegate and subcontract to other people. Do not work without a contract. A lot of people think contracts are onerous or punitive or things that you only do when you don't trust somebody. That's not true at all. A contract is just an understanding. And in fact, now I'm not a lawyer, I don't know what the laws are where you're from, but where I'm from in California, if you have like a memorandum of understanding, just a fancy name for like a letter, if you just explain what the agreement is, there you go. You've got effectively contract. Contracts are great because when no one plans to crash, no one plans to fail, but things happen. And so if you have a contract, it will define, okay, how do we unwind this project? How do we arbitrate? How do we split ways amicably? Don't work without a contract. Even if it's like with your brother or your best friend, have a letter of understanding. There are a lot of great contracts online. I really advise people against using template contracts. It doesn't feel great to pay a lawyer, but it's money well spent. And you can use that one contract again and again and just pay them a little less to tweak it each time. Do not fail to measure. Don't fail to measure. This was my number 1 failure. So again, I thought of myself as a craftsperson. Like, I love building websites, and so that's what I'm going to spend my time doing. What I didn't know was I should also say, personally, I was not financially literate. And so, for instance, I didn't have a personal budget. I also didn't have a budget for my business. I didn't know how much money I needed to make. I didn't know how long it would take me to build things. I was often so caught up in getting things done that I would say, I don't have time to track all my time. Bullshit. Because you need to know how you spend your time so that you can build better estimates. The better your estimates, the more accurate The better your estimates, the better compensated you're going to get. And the more you know these numbers, if you know what you need to make, if you know what your capacity is to get things done, and if you know what your utilization of that capacity is, and you realize the math doesn't add up, well, then you know that you can increase your rates. I never had that. And so I was working for really not enough, and I was just constantly barely getting by. Don't put yourself in that position. Measure. So that's the top 10 things not to do. That's useful in context of you might be able to look forward, look at your situation and say, okay, I've got too many eggs in one basket. Let me diversify. You might realize that, I've been at home working on my projects and I haven't been doing a whole lot in terms of networking with people. Fix it. But it's also useful, again, in context of postmortems in figuring out what went wrong. So let's talk about how to fail well. First, you have to think about managing the relationship. And you have to do a little calculus here. And this isn't an enjoyable calculus, but it's something you have to think through. Do you save the relationship? Is it a relationship worth saving? Is it something that's just maybe things are so far gone that it's not worth saving the relationship? It sucks to walk away from things, but sometimes that's the right thing to do. And it doesn't have to be in anger or in well, we'll get to the terminating part in a moment. But saving the relationship can really be about agreeing that things didn't work out, agreeing that you still like each other, agreeing that maybe there's potentials in the future, and perhaps you refer them to somebody else. If this was still a good client and it's worth saving the relationship, we'll refer them to somebody else who can serve them better than you were able to. But say they're a client from hell. Don't refer them to anybody, because that's cruel. And don't invest too much in trying to salvage the relationship, because you might not be able to. If a relationship is so toxic that it's not salvageable, don't bother. So again, this is not fun. This is not a fun thought process, but it's really important. And it's not just about the relationships with your clients or your coworkers. It's your relationships with, well, it's not just about your clients, it's also about your coworkers, right? It may be that the failure had to do not just with the client, but with your team. So for me, when my startup tanked, I saved some of the relationships. I still talk to these people. We don't really work together anymore. But there were some of us who just parted ways because they felt hurt, I felt hurt, we weren't going to salvage it. But we parted ways on decent terms, and we don't slander each other, we don't play the blame game. Just think this through, and think about all of the relationships, all of the stakeholders involved in whatever the failure is. Managing yourself. Failure is hard. Failure can be depressing, it can be embarrassing, it can be shameful. It is very easy to be our worst self when we fail. It's very easy to be irritable, to be reclusive, to withdraw from people. So just remind yourself that failure isn't the end. There's going to be a future. Take it one step at a time, because it's easy to get overwhelmed with trying to solve everything and fix everything. And empower yourself, right? It's easy to feel powerless in the face of failure. For me, something as simple as cleaning my house gives me a sense of power that I can gain a little control over my life, and I can make some steps. When my startup tanked, I also went hiking a lot. I had just enough money to take a vacation, and that was really, really healthy for me. That allowed me to get away from the problem. That allowed me to get perspective on the problem and to move on. So take care of yourself, because failure is hard. Lastly, manage your reputation. Now, I think this is what people worry most about when we think about failure. What will people think of me? So I have a few tips here. Don't let it snowball by going silent or being reclusive or not talking about it. Don't let other people tell you what your narrative is. So for me, I figured out what happened, and what story I was going to tell about how the failure happened. Now, it's critical not to play the blame game here, and not even to make excuses for yourself, or even to give mitigating factors, because they often sound like excuses, and those are unbecoming. So it's important to be able to talk about your failure, but to talk about it in a very careful way. And that narrative is not only helpful in terms of other people being able to talk about what happened, but also for your own understanding of what happened. So think through the story, be honest, be vulnerable, and think about what you stand for, and really double down on what your values are. For me, again, after the start tanked, I helped run a charity hackathon. And so when people see, like, okay, well, there's this guy who blew up his startup in all these ways, what's he going to do now? Well, I didn't have to say anything because I was just doing things. And what can anybody ask? What can someone ask of you than that you do good work, right? So focus on action rather than making a lot of noise in the wake of these failures. So this has been a condensed version of the talk. Apologies if I missed any points. Please fail well. You can find me on Twitter at Josh Simmons, and if you have any questions, I'll be in the hallway. Thank you.